And we are live.
Happy Sports Day!
Oh, happy what?
Sports Day, because Olympic trials are going on. It's the last game of the finals for the Stanley Cup. It's a sports day. I don't care about any other sport.
It might explain why nobody might be watching tonight.
But you can catch us on the flip side.
Yes, that's why we record everything. If you can't catch us live, well,
You can catch us later. And there's a cat in the box.
And yep, the cats have been
Catting.
Yep.
Catting.
Oh my God, what lighting is atrocious. I'm going to turn it down a little bit.
It looks different over here than it does here. Here it looks really, really dark. Over there, not so much. Okay, now
That's better.
Now I'm starting to do one of these.
Perfect. That looks much better. I think it looks much better.
I just look like I'm sun tanning.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Some UV lighting.
It works.
Okay.
But yeah. Hi, Dana. Hope that you are doing well this evening.
Yes.
And our
Happy Monday.
what is the last Monday of June?
We survived.
Well,
We're still
we got the rest of the week. I got it. What
that
was I
was
saying
not
about?
ghostly.
What was I saying about?
That's
lighting?
horrible lighting, by the way.
I know it's horrible lighting. I am addressing that right now.
Yay, timer.
Off you go. There we go.
Now we can see the pretty lights again.
All right.
Yeah,
Lot-
so has everybody
lot-
survived the heat so far?
Live video from our living room.
Because the
We-
heat's
we-
still on.
We barely have, and it's only going to get worse.
Oh,
Tomorrow's-
tomorrow's a little bit lighter, but then we spike again.
It's supposed to be, 100 degrees on Wednesday?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, God,
that's not going to be
yes.
fun.
My coffee shop's AC just can't keep up.
But alas, we're here in the air conditioning, which you can probably hear running in the background, and it will probably run nonstop in the background for the entire show. So
Because hot.
Because hot. But yeah, hope that y'all are staying cool. Hope that you're having a good kickoff to the summer despite the atrocious heat.
Yes.
But yes.
Yes, it is awful, Patrick. Give me 35 any day.
Yeah, yep. I will always take a wood-burning fireplace and throwing on
Blankets and layers.
over
Not.
this. But anyways, we have a lot of ground to cover tonight.
Yes. Okay. So my script was like 17,000 words to begin with.
So
It got narrowed down to just 3 places because
we are covering fewer places than we have ever covered on any show before, I think.
because there was a lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot out there.
Yep.
But that means we have a part 3.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Probably in a part 4. And yeah, we got a lot. But so yeah, we're going to be hitting 3 locations tonight for our Haunted Military Bases, Volume 2. So we have done this. We have done haunted military stuff before. I'm blanking on the date, but we've done it before. You can easily go and find it in our archive stuff. But yeah, so quick update about what else we have going on.
Yes, because we promised you special events.
We have special events. So first of all, we are going to be doing our Ghosts of the John Marshall House and the Spirits of Court End tour twice. We have a date in July and a date in August.
Yep.
So you can go ahead and you can find those currently on sale on our site, thehauntsofrichmond.com. And what you can also find there is our other special event where our good friend Paul Hope, author of Policing the Paranormal, will be joining us for a Haunted Capitol Hill tour
In August.
in August. So him and our amazing guide Steph are going to be tag teaming that tour.
Yep.
And
This is a special.
Special. Yep.
We're actually doing a Q&A session and a great post tour with Paul, so you have a chance to talk to him about some of the experiences he shares on the tour, other experiences. It's a chance for you to get your book from him and get it signed by him. So
yep, and that's all going to take place basically right back where the tour starts. So we meet up, do the tour, come back, and we will finish inside the Berkeley Hotel at their in-house restaurant, Chef's Kitchen.
which is fabulous, by the way.
Very, very good food, and They do have a bar, and anybody who goes ahead and buys a ticket for the tour will get a drink ticket to use at the bar during the Q&A session and the book signing. So it's going to be a fun night. You can go ahead and look that up too. It's
the 20th, I believe.
I believe that's right. But yes, it's Saturday in August, and so that is there. Those are our special events that we currently have lined up for this summer, and we also have more in
17th.
17th.
July 20th is the John Marshall tour.
Yep. And we have more in the hopper.
Yes.
There will be more forthcoming, but
we are plotting, we are planning, we are concocting.
Yes, but nothing else ready to announce yet. So,
Tis coming.
Oh, one other thing I do want to point out is our history tours are basically back. So they never really went away per se.
They just weren't scheduled on a regular basis. It became a choose your own tour, and we decided we needed on Saturdays to actually schedule and rotate the tours through. Sunday is still a choice of choose your own tour, so the same rules. 48 hours in advance, you need to book that with 2 tickets or just a ticket. Just a ticket. We got to look back at that.
In any case, yes. But yeah, Saturday and Sunday mornings we got our history tours with that are run through the sister company RVA Hidden History Storytellers, which is the same place as you can see whenever we do our Facebook Lives. We're checking in from RVA Hidden History Storytellers. So, yeah. Now, with all that said,
Kitty.
Yes, have a kitty here. Mr. Nico has decided to grace me with his presence. But yes, we have a lot of ground to cover on our script tonight. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Yes. Now, I did mention these were long, so we're probably going to shift
back
and forth.
We'll bounce back and forth within each location.
Yeah.
But yeah, so first stop, we are going to go ahead and take a look at Fort Riley, Kansas.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to the Heartland. And this is just outside of Junction City, Kansas. And when it was first surveyed and the site was chosen back in 1862.
52.
What?
52.
1852, excuse me.
You're reading out of name.
Yeah. They called it Camp Center. And that's because it's pretty darn close to the geographical center of the United States. So when they go ahead and they cite this, the following spring they have 3 companies of the 6th Infantry begin constructing temporary quarters for what will become the camp that later becomes Fort Riley. Now, it was later named Fort Riley in 1853 in honor of Major General Bennett C. Riley, who had led the first military escort along the Santa Fe Trail and had died earlier in the month. The fort initially aimed to protect the pioneers and traders moving along the Oregon, California, and Santa Fe trails. Now, many of the fort's buildings were built with the area's native limestone, several of which continue to stand today. By 1855, the post was well established, and as more people moved westward, additional quarters, stables, and administrative buildings were built. In July, a mule train loaded with men and materials arrived at the fort. However, cholera broke out just a few short weeks later, leaving about 100 people dead in its wake. As tensions and bloodshed increased between pro- and anti-slavery settlers, Fort Riley's troops took on the additional task of policing the troubled territory while continuing to patrol the Santa Fe Trail as attacks by the native tribes increased. When the Civil War broke out, most of the troops stationed at Fort Riley were sent eastward. However, some soldiers were left to guard those traveling west, and the base was utilized as a prisoner of war camp for captured Confederates. After the Civil War, troops from Fort Riley took on the additional role of protecting workers constructing the Kansas Pacific Railroad. In 1893, Fort Riley became the Cavalry and Light Artillery School site, which continued until 1943 when the cavalry was disbanded. The post remained active into the modern day, now covering more than 100,000 acres with a daytime population of nearly 25,000, including the 1st Infantry Division. With so much activity taking place here over the course of over 170 years, Fort Riley has acquired a number of spirits. First, we are going to have the oldest remaining building at the fort, McGill Hall. Built in 1889 to house cavalry troops, McGill has had an untold number of soldiers pass through its doors, but there is one in particular that seems to linger about. During the cavalry stay at McGill, residents had a unit photograph taken after formation one day. The soldiers placed their rifles in a circular rack after the session, barrels upright and leaning in together. One soldier did not properly unload his rifle, and as he inserted it into the rack, it discharged, killing another soldier. It is this soldier who is believed to be the man in the dark overcoat. In 1997, Specialist Bradley Earhart returned to Fort Riley from a deployment and was transferred to the 977th Military Police Company. His barracks were in McGill Hall. One evening, Earhart returned to McGill before his roommate and was alone in his room. At around 1 a.m., he awoke to discover a figure looming over the foot of his bed. The apparition was more than 6 feet tall and wore a dark overcoat. Earhart described the figure as being like a shadow, though he couldn't see through him. Eventually, Earhart gathered his courage and confronted the phantom, saying he would appreciate it if it just left him alone and went somewhere. The specter vanished, and he never saw it again. But other members of Earhart's unit have claimed to see and hear the soldier walking around the barracks when they think that they are alone.
Our next stop at Fort Riley is an architectural oddity at the base. It's known as the Scrap House. Thrown together over the course of the 1920s and 30s, the Scrap House was built from discarded building materials from the World War I era. It was first home to the post fire chief that now serves as a junior officer housing. In the late 80s and early 90s, Major Terry Kelly and his wife Linda and their teenage daughter Heather called the Scrap House home. Kelly said that he and his family would often close and lock the house and leave, only to come back and find that the doors and windows were wide open. Interior doors and windows were closed tightly at night, only to be found unlocked and wide open in the morning. Sometimes they would hear someone running through the house, slamming doors, when there was no one there. Major Kelly said that his family never felt threatened, but they all believed that there was a definite presence in the house, and that he or she was maybe a little mischievous. Perhaps a hanger-on from some of the miscellaneous bits and pieces that were used to assemble what might be Fort Riley's quirkiest structure. Now, one might think that the nature of the military's work would discourage chatter about spooky stuff, but in October of 1990, Colonel Steve Whitfield gave a presentation entitled Ghosts of Fort Riley and Fort Leavenworth at the Custard House on base. In his presentation, he shared a story of a young woman who haunted a small frame building that stood near present-day location of Waters Hall. The house had been built by the first post merchant, Mr. Robert Wilson. In summer of 1855, Susan Fox, the beautiful teenage stepdaughter of Sergeant Lowe, the postmaster of the forge, lived in the small house with her stepfather. She was a young woman with pale skin, long raven black hair. Susan had met and fallen in love with a civilian employee, Mr. John T. Price, from the fort's quartermaster detachment. The couple had become engaged and hoped to marry before the year was out. Unfortunately, it was not to be. Late spring of 1855, soldiers from Fort Riley departed to take part in the Sioux expedition. Sergeant Lowe accompanied the troops, leaving his daughter alone at the new fort. It was during this time that the cholera raised its ugly head at Fort Riley and rapidly spread throughout the post. Within days, most of the soldiers who had remained behind at the post lay dead of cholera, including the post commander, Major Edmund Ogden, and those who died was Susan Fox, who had fallen ill and died alone in the frame building she and her stepfather called home. John Price, tending to those stricken with the disease in the nearby town of Pawnee City, was unable to check on the welfare of his fiancée, but finally, when he was able to return to her house, he only discovered Susan's body. The next day, she was buried nearby what she had hoped would be her wedding dress. She was buried in the behind the house where she died, near two other victims of the cholera epidemic. Price buried her at the foot of a tall tree, a little northeast of what would have been, one day, the post trolley station. A wagon road ran almost over the foot of the grave, and Price placed a wooden railing and a wooden headstone to mark the spot. Some say that her body was later moved to the post cemetery, while others insist that the prairie fire destroyed the railing and the marker, and her grave location was lost. At any rate, it says Susan comes back to her old home several times, demanding to be let in. Strange noises and shrieks bothered later residents in the quarters, and once a maid of the old quarters looked up while she was ironing and saw the ghostly face of a young woman with dark hair staring at her through the window. The startled woman screamed and hurled her iron through the window at the ghost. Haunting became more frequent and menacing until the mistress of the house contacted a priest named Father Harris from St. Xavier's Church in Junction City, who came out to the house and performed an exorcism. The rest of the spirit was said to have been laid to rest and never again troubled the residents of the quarters. However, passers-by from time to time report that a shadowy figure of a woman wearing a black old-fashioned dress still walks the area, frantically searching for something she seems to have lost.
Susan Fox isn't the only spirit related to the cholera outbreak. In 1988, a military police officer and member of the Fort Riley Historic and Archaeological Society was escorting a group of tourists through the Custer House when he related a story of the death of Miss Cornelia Armistead during the cholera epidemic. Though Mrs. Armistead had not died in the Custer House, he shared the story because he found it quite moving. Mrs. Armistead, along with so many others at Fort Riley in the summer of 1855, contracted cholera and passed away. Major Armistead was located and returned to Fort Riley to hear the news that his children were alive, but his wife had passed. The next day, her body was placed in a coffin and buried at the post cemetery. Before returning to his command, Armistead paid a young stone mason to carve his wife's tombstone. Later that day, another officer went to check on the stonecutter's work and found the epitaph finished and the youth lying dead across Mrs. Armistead's fresh grave, dead of cholera himself. Armistead never really got over his wife's death, and his thoughts would often wander back to her grave on that lonely prairie. In 1863, at the Spangler Farm in Pennsylvania, Armistead was shot and later passed away. He and his beloved Cornelia were together again at last. After going through the story, the Army officer was asked by a couple on the tour if any images survived of Armistead and his wife. The officer had one with him that he was able to show the couple. The couple looked at each other in disbelief, and they asked if they could have a closer look. After taking the photo and speaking in hushed tones, the couple finally returned the photo, and the wife said, "There must be some mistake. This can't be the man you told us about. We've seen this man not 2 hours ago kneeling at a grave in the post cemetery." The couple explained that they came upon the stranger while strolling through the cemetery reading headstones, and described the man as being terribly upset and weeping. When they approached the row where he was kneeling in a dark blue uniform, he turned and stared at them for several seconds, making it clear that they were intruding on his grief and that he wished to be alone. The couple walked away to read the names and dates on the tombstones higher on the cemetery's gently sloping hill. Several minutes later, they looked back and noticed the stranger had left and decided to go and read the name on the gravestone. The stranger had been kneeling at Mrs. Armistead's grave. Fort Riley still has more resident spirits. In the early 1980s, Building 405, the Public Affairs Building, was used as a recreation center, offering soldiers a place to get away from the hustle and bustle of Army life. The center offered refreshments and several billiard tables. A woman who asked to remain unnamed shared a story of a young military police non-commissioned officer who served as her assistant and was responsible for closing the building on weekends and evenings during the week. She and her staff had heard tales of soldiers in the past becoming intoxicated and daring each other to complete dangerous jumps from the third floor to the basement of the narrow stairwell. It was said that some were severely injured. One day she arrived at work and found the young assistant was waiting for her in her office, visibly upset and agitated. The assistant said that he was quitting effective immediately and refused to give a reason at first, stating he would never be left in the building alone again. He eventually told her that the previous night, when he was going room to room to ensure everyone had left, that he came upon a young man dressed in an old blue soldier's uniform standing by one of the billiard tables. He called out to the young man to let him know that the center was closed and that he needed to leave. In response, the young man looked up from the table, smiled, and dissolved into a cloud of smoke. Then, there is the infamous buckskin ghost that resides at 85B Schofield Circle.
In January 2016, Lieutenant Colonel Brad Lowy and his wife Shauna and the children moved into the same historic home. Our home was built in 1909, and when they moved in, they were unaware that that there were rumors of a ghost living in their house. Turns out, though, Shauna would be the president of the Historical and Archaeological Society from 2017 to 2018, and her home was featured on the fort's history tours. As time went on, she was able to add quite a bit of spooky information about her family's experiences at the residence. The Buckskin Ghost has been seen by various residents at Schofield Barracks for decades. An article was published in 1979 in the Fort Riley Post that reports a sighting by a woman who was visiting friends at the home in 1967. It was saying that we had been talking casually when I suddenly felt a cold chill on the back of my neck. The doors were open, and so it felt like somebody was blowing on me. I guess it must have shown my expression. She was then told about the Buxton ghost who haunts the house. Despite the haunting, her friends were not scared by the presence and explained, "You can say that he is a friendly ghost. He plays with our children. Even today, our children occasionally eat cookies and snacks out at night for our nocturnal friend." I mean, that's one way to appease your ghost.
Yeah. Milk and cookies, it'll do it.
Yeah. I wonder if you like Oreos.
Who doesn't like Oreos?
Or if it's chocolate chip.
I know, some people don't like Oreos, but...
I'm just curious what type of cookies.
I mean, chocolate chip's always good.
Yes. I have stuff to make chocolate chips and just needed to stop being a million degrees outside. Anyway.
We could just bake them on the dashboard of the car.
Yeah.
We could.
We digress. Cookies are a wonderful distraction. Okay, back to the story. In the more modern day, Lieutenant Colonel Lowy explains that most of the events occurred the first 6 weeks they were actually in the house. 2 of these events happened around 2:30 a.m. The first was a mysterious falling of a plant and vase from the fireplace mantel. The other was a fire alarm that went off a month after their arrival, waking Brad and Shauna from their sleep. Upon inspection of the house, there was no reason for the alarm. Unexplained fire alarms are not uncommon in ghost houses on Post. In a 1998 article from the Topeka Capital Journal reported that fire alarms of Custer House kept going off without apparent cause during last year's ghost tours. The first time the alarm sounded, the Post fire officials checked out the house and reset the alarm. After the second alarm, they checked out the house, finding no cause for the alarm, disconnected it. When the third time happened, they joined the ranks of the many residents of Fort Riley who wondered about the ghosts at the old Army post. I mean, when you disconnect it.
Yeah.
However, the Mexican ghost did not stop at pulling the fire alarm. Shauna had another interesting experience with the ghost, whom they have come to refer to as Bucky. The morning after the fire alarm incident, Shauna was downstairs in the living room when she felt something in the room with her. And she was really, without thinking about it, said, "Bucky, you need to quit with the nighttime stuff. We think it's kind of cool you're here, and we don't want you to leave. But you need to let us get some sleep at night. If you don't let us sleep at night, we're going to get a chaplain in here and bless the house, and you're going to have to leave." Basically, she laid down the rules. This was the first time a family member referred to our friend as Bucky, and the nickname stuck. After this incident, though, the nighttime shenanigans seemed to stop, and the family had several months without ghostly incidences. Until Brad's mother came to visit. Brad recalled what he referred to as the return of Bucky, or the toothbrush incident. "My mother came to visit for several weeks, arriving Saturday before Mother's Day in 2016. But since I was out in the field, Shanna dragged Mom's suitcase and put it in the guest room on the second floor, then came back down to visit. My mother is a night owl, and by the time she went to bed, it was after midnight. Everybody else was long since in bed. In the morning, she came back down. She immediately asked Shauna if Shauna had done something with her toothbrush. Shauna replied she had not and asked why. Mom explained her electric sonicare was missing. She pulled everything out of her suitcase and her purse looking for it. She had had it the night before at the hotel in Oklahoma and insisted she had packed it before leaving the hotel. Not thinking much about it, Shauna went and bought her a new toothbrush later that day. A couple of days later, the subject of Bucky came up in conversation between my mother, Shauna, and the kids. During the conversation, Mom suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence and then said, "Bucky, if you took my toothbrush, can you please return it?" Everyone had a good laugh at the time, but that night when my mom made her way up to the room, there was a toothbrush sitting on top of the dresser in her room. It was smack in the middle, and it could not have been more centered on the top of the dresser unless somebody had actually used a ruler to place it. At the breakfast the next morning, the incident was the talk of the table. Mom remarked that while she was grateful to have had her toothbrush back, she would wish Bucky had turned the cap with it. Later that night, the cap was found right next to the toothbrush in the bathroom. Need to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yep. The Mexican ghost shows no sign of going anywhere, and neither do any of the other spirits of Fort Riley, making it one of the spookiest military bases around. Just a warning if you were ever stationed there.
Yes.
So now we're going to come home. We're going to come back to Virginia. Because I promised you Fort Monroe.
Yep, Fort number 2, Fort Monroe. So, we briefly brought you a story from here when we did our presidential hauntings episode on February 15th of 2021, telling of how the ghost of George Washington visited former Confederate President Jefferson Davis while he was imprisoned here. However, that's far from the only spirited activity from this historic fortification. So, if you wanted to get that story, go back, watch that episode, but we got a lot more to share with you from Fort Monroe.
Because that was only one sliver.
Yeah, so Fort Monroe is a former military installation in Hampton at Old Point Comfort. Now, it is recently former.
Recently, it hasn't been too long since it was, decommissioned?
Yeah, I think we got it in here, okay. But yeah, I mean,
you
but
can
still,
go visit it. It's really cool.
Yeah, a military base. We're throwing it in. We get a editorial discretion.
I never said they were active.
Editorial discretion.
Yeah, as I said, I never said they were going to be active.
Yeah. So, Fort Monroe, it is currently managed by the Fort Monroe Authority in partnership with the National Park Service and the City of Hampton as the Fort Monroe National Monument. Along with Fort Wool, Fort Monroe originally guarded the navigation channel between the Chesapeake Bay and Hampton Roads. Until disarmament in 1946, the areas protected by the fort were the entire Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac River regions, including the water approaches to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, along with important shipyards and naval bases in the Hampton Roads area. Surrounded by a moat, the six-sided bastion fort is the largest fort by area ever built in the United States. The roots of Fort Monroe can be traced back to 1609 when the first defensive fortifications were built at Old Point Comfort. The first was a wooden stockade named Fort Algernon, close enough, followed by other small forts. However, the much more substantial facility of stone that became known as Fort Monroe and the adjacent Fort Wool were completed in 1834. The principal fort was named in honor of U.S. President James Monroe. Although Virginia became part of the Confederate States of America, Fort Monroe remained in Union hands throughout the American Civil War. Union General George B. McClellan landed the Army of the Potomac at the fort during the Peninsula Campaign of 1862.
Big difference.
Big difference, yes. The fort was notable as a historic and symbolic site of early freedom for former slaves who found their way to the fort during the conflict. For 2 years following the war, the former Confederate President Jefferson Davis was imprisoned at the fort. His first months of confinement were spent in a cell of the casemated fort walls that is now part of its casemate museum. Around the turn of the 20th century, numerous gun batteries were added in and near Fort Monroe, making it the largest fortification and headquarters of the harbor defenses of Chesapeake Bay. In the 19th and 20th centuries, it housed artillery schools, including the Coast Artillery School. It later became the home of Continental Army Command, succeeded by the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command, which was headquartered at the fort from 1973 until it was moved to Fort Eustis in 2011. This signaled the deactivation of Fort Monroe as a military installation, but its legacy lives on as several development projects have helped to utilize the facility while maintaining its historic atmosphere. Portions of the site have also been designated as a national monument. It is a perfect atmosphere for spirits to linger on and be noticed.
Yes, out there in those swamps.
Yep. So most of the spirited activity takes place around the casemate, the moat-encircled structure that is one of the oldest sections of the site. The homes within the fortress have been visited by several apparitions, including that of a small child dressed in turn-of-the-century clothing who can be heard laughing and playing with toys. Jane Polinsky, author and former resident of Fort Monroe, collected ghost stories about the old fortification after she had her own encounter in the 1960s. She lived in a house across from the Casemate Museum, and she recalled how one night she brought her dog downstairs to let him out. She didn't turn on any lights and sat down to wait. Then it started, a knocking at the back door. It was a knocking and scratching sound that Jane thought was her dog. Wondering what was going on, she got up to go and let him in, walking through the dining room to get there, but something made her freeze in her tracks. There, in her dining room, was a man standing by the fireplace. Jane described him as very arrogant looking. He had a uniform shirt from a much earlier period, probably mid-18th century, and he had his arm on the mantel. Stunned, Jane could only stare as the man just disappeared in front of her. She backed her way out of the room, through her living room, and out the front door. Her dog came bounding down the street to meet her, meaning he certainly hadn't been near the door to make any noise. Jane's son also saw a strange mist in his bedroom while living in that house, and later residents also reported the same mist. Polinsky collected accounts of paranormal experiences from other residents on the installation and compiled the book stories in a book, The Ghosts of Fort Monroe, which was published in 1972. For the remainder of her life, Jane was a leading ghost story expert for the area, conducting research on many different hauntings, including some of the foul.
Constructed in 1819, Quarter 1 is the oldest house and the most ornate residential structure inside the fort. It originally served as the constructing engineer's quarters and later the commanding officer's quarters. Famous visitors include the Marquis de Lafayette, President Abraham Lincoln, and King Kalakula of the Kingdom of Hawaii. That was not the name there. It seems that the Marquis and Lincoln may visit the home as a haunting, along with Ulysses S. Grant. They would only have been a stopover for the Marquis during his return visit in the U.S. during the mid-1820s, but Lincoln and Grant would have spent some time here, poring over papers, reviewing troop movements, and the battles as a result of during the Civil War. A crew of paranormal investigators who had the opportunity to check out Quarters Number 1 also caught some disembodied voices on record, including a little girl calling for her cat, Greta. And it also just so happens that the specter of a gray cat has also been spotted by some people who work here day in and day out. Just outside the fortification walls is the Chamberlain. It was a one-time hotel that is now a senior home. It too is reported to be rife with the spirits of those who came before. A woman dubbed Esmeralda, a ship captain's daughter, is said to haunt the building. She has been sighted on the 8th floor, waiting for her father to come home. Legend has it that Esmeralda's fisherman father was lost at sea in the 1920s, and she is still trying to find a vantage point that will give her a glimpse of his return. An apparition at the top, with a top hat, has been seen on the porch of the hotel as well, which people like to claim is the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe.
Because everybody needs to have some Poe.
And you know, Poe likes to move up and down the East Coast. He's a restless spirit. I mean, he was a rambler in life. So.
Oh, very much so.
A rambler in death. Poe spent time at Fort Monroe a couple of times during his life, most notably as a sergeant major of artillery while commissioned in the military here. Poe came to regret his enlistment and tried to get kicked out, including showing up on the parade field wearing nothing but his hat. Later in his life, just a few weeks before his untimely death, Poe came to a hotel at Fort Monroe, possibly the Chamberlain. He was seen reciting poems on the porch to a young lady. While it's possible that the haunting today could be attributed to Poe, his spirit has already been, pretty busy, as we mentioned, in numerous other locations, including here in Richmond at 2 different locations. Adding to the list of hauntings is the Civil War era apparition known as the Lady in White. The legend is that the Lady in White lived on the fort with her husband, who was an army officer. While her husband was away for work, the Lady in White found love in the arms of a much younger man. As might be expected with a story like this, one day her husband came home and he found them together. Naturally, he was upset by this, and it quickly escalated into a, well, let's just say he shot both of them. Ever since, the wife has been seen roaming the fort in a white nightdress, seeming to be in search of her lost lover. People wandering the fort at nighttime hours have reported taking pictures only to get home later to catch glimpses of the lady in white in the photos. So if you get a chance to visit Fort Monroe after dark, be sure to take some pictures of your own. You might just encounter the lady in white yourself. Better yet, if you want a spooky tour, keep an eye on Fort Monroe's event calendar. The Fort Monroe Authority has held ghost walks for several years, with tickets typically going on sale in mid-September. Question. Hello, Alex.
Just noting Alex, Hampton Roads native, who's only been there once. I've lost track of how many times I've driven by there and only visited once.
Yep, I've been twice now.
Yeah.
Both times we have not gotten into the Casement Museum.
No, it was closed when I was there with you.
Yeah, and Marcia and I got there too late to get in that one time we went. We did the other museum that was near the welcoming area, and we actually walked around the grounds, but we didn't get a chance to get into the basement. Another time.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely need to get back to Fort Monroe.
And I will say the quarters #1. Walking by that, I was like, there's something there. All right, now we are going to bring in the fort that was requested that started this search.
And I'm not even sure if they're tuned in. Yeah, I'm not sure. No, but well, this one's for you.
Yep.
So there was a request for Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So we're not going too far. We're just going to slide down the East Coast a little bit.
I am just going to put the background. The boys are having a tussle in the box, so that's what you're hearing.
Yeah, if you hear that, the cats are catting. So this is down on the, again, North Carolina coast. It has long served as an amphibious assault training facility. It started as Camp New River in April of 1941.
Oh, there's Beverly.
Oh, perfect.
Beverly
Yeah, Beverly, yes.
Yay.
So, yes, we got Camp Lejeune. Yep. And Camp New River, April 1941. It was later renamed in honor of John A. Lejeune, the 13th Commandant of the Marine Corps after his passing in 1942. Since its founding, Camp Lejeune has grown to encompass 246 square miles, hosting thousands of American military forces and their allies. All of this on a site that has history dating back to the colonial era and beyond. For those who have spent time at this facility, few are surprised when they hear eerie tales arise about bizarre phenomena across the base, and many of these people have stories of their own. Now, before diving right into the stories, excuse me, I'm going to switch the order around real quick. I want to be able to go ahead and give credit where credit's due for this. All the stories that we're going to be sharing tonight for Camp Lejeune came from an active military service member named Nick. He runs a page called Tales from the Grid Square. Now, some of the experiences on site are his own, while others have been shared with him by his peers across the armed forces. We did edit the stories that we selected for length and for also reading aloud, since some of them were actually formatted in a way that was meant to just like read off the paper. So we reformatted and edited for length a little bit, but all of these stories did come from this site, Tales from the Grid Square. So if you enjoy them, you can check out more like them online.
I gotta tell you, that site is a rabbit hole, just to let you know.
So I want to go ahead and give that a shout out before we really dive into these stories. And this is, again, just scratching the surface for Camp Lejeune. Because Camp Lejeune, Beverly, when you pointed this out, I had no idea exactly what we were going to be getting into. But oh my gosh.
There was a lot.
Camp Lejeune has a lot. So all of these stories, first-hand accounts from service members
who have been there.
So the first one comes from an individual that he preferred to remain nameless. He recalled his time as a lance corporal in the Marine Corps when he was stationed at Lejeune in 1990. He was living in a decent 3-man room, but only had a single roommate at the time, Lance Corporal Gray. The racks were on opposite sides of the room, about 12 feet apart, with the exit door in between, providing plenty of space for each of the Marines. It was during the coldest months of winter, at least as cold as things get in coastal North Carolina, and there was actually a respectable blanket of snow on the ground. About 2 a.m., the Marine woke from a very odd dream. He could not recall the particulars of the dream, but his arm was stretched out straight towards the ceiling, as if he was trying to fend something off. He rolled over to get back to sleep, but as he rolled over, he became aware that something was standing right beside him. Something so dark that it was clearly visible even in the darkened room. The heavy curtains shut out almost all light, making it barely possible to see anything in the room, all except this presence standing next to him. He described the entity as a grim reaper, minus the skeeve, and unnaturally dark. It stood over 6 feet tall and was disturbingly thin in nature. The Marine snapped to, quickly flipping over and crying out in surprise. The figure remained there, and as the Marine tried to sit up, the Reaper reached out as if to motion him to go back to sleep. Its thin arms pushed against the Marine as if trying to hold him down, and then the Marine described a jolt. It was like electricity, but only in that it disrupted his senses. After about 30 seconds, he was able to gather himself long enough to cry out to his roommate, Gray. Gray woke quickly and started shouting himself, but the Marine was struck by a second jolt, forcing him back down. He lost track of Gray, and what after felt like another 30 seconds, he was able to force himself up to a sitting position on the side of his rack, but was soon rewarded with a third jolt, this time stronger than the previous times. While he stayed upright, he was in a heavy daze, fighting to clear his head. He couldn't lift his head and found himself looking down at the dark entity's feet, now standing scant inches in front of him with its hand on his back between his shoulders. Finally, Gray hit the light switch. In the Marine's dazed state, it appeared as if the light traveled through the room over the course of a couple seconds, gradually filling the space. The entity, seemingly allergic to the light, leapt over the Marine under the wall, knocking the Marine back down on his rack and scraping his face. As the Marine's senses cleared, he looked up to see Gray standing at the light switch, looking back in a stunned state. Gray suddenly came to, running over to the wall lockers, throwing them open as if he expected something to jump out. Then he ran into the bathroom. Still stunned and unsure of what happened, the Marine just sat there processing what he had just seen. Gray slowly walked out of the bathroom and sat down at the end of his rack, and for a moment the two just looked at each other. The Marine finally asked Gray, "What did you see?" Gray responded, "I seen something with 2 limbs stretched out at you." Gray went on to describe that when he tried to jump for the lights, he was jolted, just as the Marine had been on his rack, slowing his ability to make it to the light switch. Despite the frightening circumstances, the Marine did not interpret the entity's actions as aggressive, rather that it was simply watching the Marine's odd behavior during his dream. When the Marine awoke so quickly, the entity was caught up in a situation that it had to react to. Immediately after this incident, the air in the room seemed to be extremely dry, like the moisture in the air was somehow sucked out. It was so dramatic that the roommates opened the door to let in some fresh air, lest they find themselves dealing with a sudden nosebleed. What the entity was remains a mystery, just one of many bizarre encounters at Lejeune. Speaking of which, we are far from done here.
Our next story at Camp Lejeune takes place during the summer of 2006, revolving around another Marine Corps Lance Corporal. He lived in Terroir Terrace 2 base housing, where he and his wife were in a small apartment. Built in 1942, it was one of 5 units in that building, and while it was well maintained, it was slated for demolition in favor of new privatized housing. Many of the other buildings in the area had already been torn down, and this was the last one standing of its vintage. The Lance Corporal was starting Iraq pre-deployment training and was leaving to go to the Mojave Desert next week. During this time, his wife has decided to go home and spend some time with her family, as he would be gone for a month. One afternoon, he got home and started his normal routine of taking a shower and then having dinner. While showering, he kept thinking how he could see a shadow in the shape of a person through the curtain in his peripheral vision. The bathroom seemed to get darker, and he pulled the shower curtain aside, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The shadow would dissipate and the lighting in the room would seem to normalize. Admittedly, the lighting in the bathroom wasn't great, and the Marine was tired after a long day in the heat and humidity of coastal North Carolina during the summertime. So it was a little unnerving, but he convinced himself he's just tired. He finished cleaning up and moved to the kitchen for dinner. After about 10 minutes, too tired to cook, he gave up and he decided he was going to get some pizza. He sat down in front of the TV to wait for the delivery and was asleep within minutes. He dreamt about a dark shadow figure chasing him. It was a dream where no matter how fast you ran or tried to run, you could never get away. As the figure chased him, he would make the lights go out. It was an ominous feeling that lingered, that if he did not stay in the light, the dark shadow would catch him. The dream started in the house, going from room to room. Then he opened his front door and found himself running to a new house, and it was his childhood home. Then after going through another door, he found himself running inside a random hotel, and while the shadow figure consumed the light as he followed. Boys!
Sorry, they were
Tussling a little too hard, apparently.
They were screaming at each other. I don't even know.
Full moon. Then he was outside running into the dark night from streetlight to streetlight and trying to evade the shadow figure. This totally sounds like, what's that one in Colorado? Silent Hill. This totally sounds like Silent Hill.
Okay. You threw me for. I was thinking Silent Hill, and then you threw me for a loop of Colorado.
I'm sorry, I meant Pennsylvania.
Okay.
My bad. I was trying to think of the name of the town. Was not the going to see.
Centralia.
Centralia. That's what I was trying to think of. Okay, moving back to our story. Then he snapped awake. The doorbell's ringing. His pizza has arrived. Saved by the pizza. The dream seemed like it lasted for a long time, but it had only been about 10 minutes. He sat on the couch with his pizza, diving into the meal as he contemplated the dream. He wasn't fearful after all. It was just a dream. But what a strange dream it had been. And he wondered if there was any connection with the shadow figure in the bathroom earlier, but chalked it up to coincidence and exhaustion. He finished his dinner, set about getting ready for bed. It was early, but he was tired. He put on a MASH DVD into the player. He set to run all episodes and climbed into bed, because that's what you fall asleep to. Yeah, okay. It wasn't even one full episode before he was fast asleep. A few hours later, he's awakened by something. He opened his eyes, facing out of the bedroom door and into the hallway. Something passed the door. It was like a shadow. He looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. As he continued to come to his senses, a sense of dread started to set in. Sadness, terror, such that he had never felt before. It was so severe and nauseating that he got up and decided to investigate what he thought he had seen. He flipped off the covers and started to sit up, but something suddenly slammed him back down onto his bed. His eyes were forced to close, and no matter how awake he was now, he couldn't open them. Even though he couldn't see, he could feel that there were 4 entities, and each one was holding one of his limbs. He struggled to break free, but their grasp wouldn't let him. He couldn't speak or yell. He could barely make a peep. He had no idea what was going on, but the terror was consuming. He tried commanding the spirits to leave by yelling, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." But again, his words were just garbled. And all this time, the MASH DVD continued playing in the background, driving home the knowledge that he was not dreaming.
Lee would really appreciate this.
Yes, she would.
Lee
could not make it tonight.
No, Lee could not make it tonight, but Lee is a MASH fanatic. Lee loves MASH.
Yep.
I mean, and really, who doesn't love MASH?
It's a great show.
I love MASH.
Our namesake is in that show.
True.
Trying to pray in his mind, his thoughts seemed to scatter and incoherent. Desperation and despair were setting in when he sensed a new presence enter the room. The feeling that accompanied this presence was one of command and authority over the other entities. As they continued holding him down, and the new presence put his face down close and began scanning over his body. Though he couldn't see anything, he had an image in his head of a lion or some other beast. It started at his feet and began slowly working its way up. Back and forth, back and forth. It seemed it was searching for something. as it reached his face and stopped and stared for what seemed like forever. Finally, it started back down, stopped in his stomach. The Marine couldn't fathom what it was searching for, but that lull gave him a moment to collect himself. He tried with all his might to sit up and form the words in his head and command the entity to leave. Then his mouth began to cooperate and started to form words. They were still a bit jumbled, but they began to come together, and he finally managed to shout that quote again. The attackers broke rank and fled. Still feeling the need to struggle to get up, the Marine almost threw himself out of bed, with nothing left trying to hold him down. He picked himself up, he ran out of the room, down the hall, out the front door, into the parking lot. But he hadn't grabbed anything on his way out. Nope, no phone, no keys, nothing. He had to go back in the house.
Dun, dun, dun.
He started towards the door, but got a weird feeling on the back of his neck. The hair stood up on his arms, legs, and he began to feel sick again. He flung the front door open, ran back inside, turning on the lights as he went. When he reached the bedroom, he immediately turned on the light, ran to his nightstand, grabbed his phone, and ran back out of the house. With no better idea of what to do, he called his dad. It's 3:30 in the morning in North Carolina, making it only 1:30 back home in Utah. Dad answered the phone immediately and asked what was wrong. Emotionally exhausted, the Marine sobbed, "Dad, I was attacked." His father asked, "Who attacked you? Are you okay? Where are you now?" "Dad, I was attacked by a spirit." Silence. A very long pause. "A what?" "Dad, I was attacked by a spirit. A ghost. Something." His father asked if he had a safe place to go, which led the Marine's next call to his corporal. The corporal, Jake, was a good friend and lived right around the corner. Without any hesitation or questions, Jake offered the Marine a place to stay for as long as he needed. He drove over, picked him up, and even went inside to get his uniform items and other necessities. He couldn't bring himself to go back inside that house again. The terrible feeling lingered just being close to it. Back at Jake's house, they set him up on the couch, and then Jake asked what happened. The Marine relayed his experience in exact detail. Jake believed every word and decided he had never before heard someone tell a story with such fear and conviction. The Marine was grateful for having his friend's ear. He did not return to the house before going to the Mojave for training. When he got back, he sat down with his wife and shared the details of the incident that had happened.
What is with you two?
As they were talking, he didn't want to frighten her unnecessarily while he was away, and she actually opened up and shared that she had had strange things happen to her in that house as well. On a couple of occasions when he was at work, she had gone to the bathroom to take a shower. She swore she saw a shadow of a person through the shower curtain. She figured he had come home for lunch and snuck in the bathroom for a quick peek and a kiss before heading back to work. She said she had spoken to him and asked how work was going, but no answer happened. She would pull the curtain back and find nothing there, and the shadow would be gone. At the time, she said she didn't really put much thought into it and figured she had just imagined it. However, after the Marine story, she was pretty shaken. When he deployed to Iraq, she went home to stay with her family. She didn't want to be alone in the home again. After the deployment ended, the couple moved to a new place, off base. After a year later, he met a service member in the U.S. Army who had had a similar experience. She believed she had been attacked by an evil spirit at Camp Lejeune as well. In all his years, he said he had never felt so much terror as he experienced in that one night in his home on Camp Lejeune.
We seem to be having some toy jealousy or something. I don't know what's gotten into them, but in any case...
They're in a mood.
They're in a mood, yes. And, well, I normally would encourage them to go ahead and tussle and wrestle and stuff like that. They can get...
Not while we're doing Facebook Live and there's equipment out.
Yeah, I worry about them hurting each other sometimes with as rough as they can get.
Yes.
But anyways, I digress. One more story from Camp Lejeune. So, experiences at Camp Lejeune go beyond terrifying shadow encounters in the living quarters. The woods around Camp Lejeune harbor their own horrors. This next Marine was called to action on one of the coldest nights he ever experienced. It was December, and he was trying to sleep when his platoon sergeant interrupted. "You awake?" "If you need me to be awake, Staff Sergeant," the Marine answered wisely.
There's only one answer for that question.
"Good. Go with this screw-up to the ammo point. I'll be back to get you at 0200. The Marine that was roused from his slumber couldn't be bothered to remember the other Marine's name, but could recall his shrill voice and that he was a particularly chatty idiot. It was late and cold, and the Marine just wanted to do his rounds in silence. It was about 0:45 when the atmosphere changed. A fog started coming in from the edge of the tree line surrounding the field before the guard shack. Nothing too unusual, but as the fog got closer, a feeling of unease crept in. Soon the fog had reached them and was over waist high. They couldn't even see their feet. At 1:10, the other guy finally stopped yapping. The Marine looked over and observed the formerly chatty guy staring through the rifle optic with his mouth open. Then he saw something move on the inside of the tree line, something that was above the fog. The Marine radioed that there was an issue with an unidentified floating object. Looking back to his fellow Marine, he noted the terror on his face. The expression was so distorted as to be comical. The Marine started laughing until he heard laughter come from the fog. A ghostly apparition started bounding towards them. As it bounced forward, they heard its voice, talking, whispering, and cooing at them, its utterances almost seeming to echo. It beckoned. "Come here, my little children. Mommy's back. Don't be shy. You've had nothing to fear. It's your mommy." It carried on over and over, and each jump it started over louder.
All I can think of is this is Bette Midler. I'm sorry. You just read that, and that's where my mind went. Suck the souls out of children.
The fog was getting denser and deeper, almost up to their stomachs. The Marine shouldered his rifle to track the figure, but it was too fast. He was able to make out a plaid farm dress stained in various splotches. Lowering his rifle, he watched as the figure drew to a distance of about 50 meters. Its face appeared normal, almost pretty, but as it closed distance, it grew uglier, eventually becoming almost too hideous to lay eyes on. Details started to emerge, including a head so caved in on one side it could fit a fist. The fog went from gray to a bluish hue. The voice stopped sounding audible, replaced by rasps and screeching. The chatty Marine was in the fetal position and sobbing once it closed to about 15 feet. At this point, a pickup truck came screeching onto the scene, high beams cutting through the fog. The hideous creature vanished, leaving the Marines to sort out the scene. It took about an hour to get the once chatty Marine into the truck and off to the dock for a look. The remaining Marine explained the experience to the Sergeant of Guard, who promptly relieved the Marine of any further guard shifts for the remainder of their training. The creature encountered on that night was no stranger to the Marines at Camp Lejeune. She is a local legend that has been seen time and again, sometimes watching from a distance, sometimes wandering close, and sometimes getting right in your face. Sometimes she's a full-grown woman, sometimes a teenager, sometimes a little girl. Sometimes she's pretty, other times grotesque. Sometimes you hear a young voice in the wood line, screams, crying, or calls for help. So what is a Marine to do? Local wisdom is to ignore it and stay away. No good comes from engaging with the woman in white. But where did she come from, and who might she be? If you venture down the road from Camp Devil Dog, you will come across Verona Loop National Cemetery. Inside, along the edges of the cemetery that border the Camp Devil Dog training area, you will find a lonely grave marker. It simply bears the name, number 16, Molly Humphreys. Not much is known about Molly, who she was or how she met her end, but what is known is that she died at a young age, gone too soon. The Marines who venture here think that she is responsible for the bizarre and terrifying encounters, so much so that it's common to find flowers on Molly's grave, an attempt to placate the spirit.
Patrick, you don't want to go play with this one.
Yeah, very witchy vibes.
And not good witchy vibes.
No, not good witchy vibes. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah.
This is evil. We're talking Baba Yaga.
Yep. So, hope that you all enjoyed our stories tonight from Fort Riley and Fort Monroe and Camp Lejeune.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we got more. We'll be doing military
there's
bases
a lot
again.
more.
And I doubt it's going to be the last time we talk about Camp Lejeune either, because there was so much more that hit the cutting room floor. So, we will.
That was a fun rabbit hole to go down, though, I gotta say.
Yep.
Fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
But in the meantime,
We got lighthouses coming up next.
yep, we are scheduled to do lighthouses in 2 weeks from today.
Yep. And then after that was firehouses and museums. And we're actually featuring one that our friend David Sloan was working on
Down in Key West.
down in Key West, and he actually sent us his stories. So we will be getting stories from the master.
Yes. So, but in the meantime, lighthouses 2 weeks, and then another couple of weeks until we do
the firehouses, and then it'll be haunted objects after that, I believe.
Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. One thing at a time. But, so, thank you all again so much for tuning in. And stay cool out there.
Yes, please stay safe.
Beat the heat. And if you do feel inclined to get outside and do something, you can beat the heat by joining us on one of our evening tours.
Absolutely. We got tours going Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday this week.
Yep.
So
we technically have availability basically every night.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Except for tomorrow. Because tomorrow's tour day. But that's okay, because we're going to the baseball game.
Yes. We're going to go watch the Squirrels play tomorrow night. As the sun sets, so it shouldn't be too terribly hot. Okay. But we're going to go get some ballpark food and some...
A traditional summer event.
We're going to go do something not spooky. Shh. But, anyways, I think that's it.
Yep.
I think that's it. So, again, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Hope that you enjoyed, and...
back to your sporting events.
Yes, back to your sporting events. The Stanley Cup Final.
They're 1-1 right now.
Stanley Cup Final, Game 7. The last game of the Stanley Cup Final is going on right now.
There'll be a very large silver trophy being awarded.
Yep, so you can go catch that, or you can go catch some of the Olympic trials going on. So all kinds of sporty stuff going on right now. I know that we'll be turning one of those back on here in just a few minutes.
Yes, and of course the Skellies will converge into Olympic themes in July because Olympic time.
Yep. So, all right. Thank you again for watching. Hope you all have a good night.
Good night.